You scroll past him every few days. He is standing in front of a car, or on a balcony somewhere warm, or showing you a number on a phone screen, a number with a lot of zeros. And something in you responds to that. Not envy exactly, something quieter, a question you do not quite let yourself finish asking. Here is what nobody tells you. That man is probably broke. Not broke the way you think of broke, not empty pockets, but leveraged, stretched, spending money he has not earned yet on things designed to make you believe he already has. The car is leased. The balcony is a hotel room. The number on the screen is revenue, not profit. And the difference between those two words is the difference between performance and actual wealth. The people who are genuinely building something are not performing. They are not trying to be seen. They are doing something so ordinary, so repetitive, so visually uninteresting that no algorithm on earth would ever surface it. And that is exactly the point. There is a behavior pattern shared by people who quietly accumulate real, lasting wealth. It has been measured. It shows up in financial behavior research across income levels and backgrounds, and it looks almost nothing like what you have been watching. What you are about to hear will not excite you the way a highlight reel excites you. It will do something better. It will make the highlight reel stop working on you. And once that happens, once you see through it completely, the path forward becomes very clear. Chapter 1. The rich people you watch aren't rich. Across every era of human civilization, wealth has attracted imitators. Long before cameras existed, before screens, before the internet turned everyone's living room into a stage, there were people who wore the symbols of prosperity while quietly drowning in debt. It is one of the oldest human patterns, the performance of having in place of the actual work of building. What has changed is not the pattern itself. What has changed is the scale. Today, that performance reaches millions of people before breakfast. It is shaping what you believe wealth looks like, what it feels like, and most dangerously, what it requires from you. You are living inside a mythology that was built to be watched, not replicated. And what you are about to hear will not match what you have been shown. That gap between the show and the reality is exactly where most people lose years of their financial lives without ever knowing it. Here is a question worth sitting with for a while. You do not need to answer it yet. Why do the people who talk the most about money so rarely seem to have any left? Hold that question. We will come back to it. And when we do, the answer will be more specific than you expect. Picture two people. The first one you probably recognize, not as an individual but as a type. He is in his late 20s. He posts every day. His backdrop is a rented penthouse or a leased car, or sometimes a private plane cabin that costs $400 an hour to sit in for a photo. He talks about building wealth, about multiple income streams, about the mindset required to escape ordinary life. His audience is in the hundreds of thousands. His comments are full of people asking for his course, his blueprint, his secrets. From the outside, everything about him signals financial arrival. Now open his actual numbers. His income is real, roughly $240,000 last year from course sales, sponsorships, and affiliate commissions. But his expenses consume nearly all of it. The penthouse rental for content, the team that edits and posts and manages, the travel that fills his feed, the software subscriptions, the paid ads to grow his list, the professional lighting equipment. After taxes and operating costs, he is netting somewhere around $30,000. His savings account holds less than 1 month of expenses. He has no investment portfolio to speak of. Every month is a performance that must be funded by the next month's revenue. He is not building anything. He is running, very publicly, in place. Now picture the second person. She is 41. She is a regional accountant in a mid-sized city. Her car is 7 years old. She bought her house 12 years ago and has been making the same unremarkable mortgage payment ever since. She does not post about money. She does not have a personal brand. If you passed her at a grocery store, nothing about her would suggest financial significance. She is, by every visible measure, ordinary, boring even. Her net worth is just under $1.4 million. That number did not arrive suddenly. It did not come from a viral moment or a product launch or a single spectacular bet. It came from a decade of automatic contributions to a retirement account, a paid-off car she kept driving instead of replacing, a small rental property she bought when prices were low and held without drama, and a savings rate that stayed above 30% of her income through good years and tight ones. Her wealth is invisible because it was never performed. It was only executed. Revisit to what your numbers actually looked like in that season 3 years ago and look only at the money side. Not the story you told yourself, but the actual numbers. What was in your account, what you owed, what you owned. And think about how many hours in those 3 years you spent watching someone else perform wealth. Someone who made you feel behind. Someone who made your own path feel too slow, too quiet, too small. Now ask whether anything about your relationship with money actually changed because of what you watched, or whether you only learned to want differently without changing what you actually did. That is the mirror. Most people do not like what they see in it, not because the reflection is broken, but because it is accurate. Here is what the research tells us, stripped of the language that makes it feel complicated. Studies on household net worth consistently find that visible consumption and actual wealth accumulation move in opposite directions past a certain income level. People who spend visibly, who drive newer cars and wear expensive things and eat at places where the check requires a moment of recovery, tend to have lower net worth relative to their income than people who do not. This is not a moral observation. It is a financial one. Every dollar directed toward a signal is a dollar that is not compounding. And compounding is the only engine that builds wealth at the scale that actually changes a life. The people who mastered this knew it was invisible work. They knew nobody would applaud it. Nobody would subscribe to watch it. There is no aesthetic to a brokerage account statement, no cinematic quality to setting up an automatic transfer on a Tuesday morning and then doing nothing. The doing nothing is, in fact, the strategy. But doing nothing looks like being behind. And being behind is the feeling that content about wealth exploits most ruthlessly. Consider a man named Daniel. He grew up watching his father work 2 jobs and still never seemed to have enough. By the time Daniel was 26, he had developed a deep fear that the same fate was waiting for him. He found a financial content creator online, a man with a slick delivery and a camera setup that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Daniel watched that creator for 2 years. He bought the course. He tried the side hustles the creator recommended. He spent money to make money and made very little of either. What he did accumulate in those 2 years was a refined vocabulary for talking about wealth, and a sharper sense of inadequacy every time he checked his own account. Then Daniel's car broke down, and he had to take the bus for 3 weeks. On the bus, he sat next to a retired postal worker named Frank, who was reading a paperback book and humming quietly to himself. They started talking. Frank had worked the same route for 29 years. Same salary, modest raises, no side hustles. But Frank had maxed his retirement contributions since the year he turned 25. He had bought a small house and never moved. He had no debt. At 62, Frank was entirely free. He did not know what viral meant. He did not care. Daniel stared out the bus window for a long time after that conversation. The revelation that landed for him was not complex. It was almost embarrassing in its plainness. He had been studying performance. Frank had been executing process. And process, repeated without interruption across years, had produced something that no amount of studying performance could replicate. This is what the visibility equals value myth hides from you. It hides it not through deception exactly, but through selection. What gets shown to you is what gets engagement. What gets engagement is what creates emotional response. And the emotional responses that spread the fastest are aspiration and inadequacy, sometimes both at once. A man on a yacht sells both. A woman with a paid-off mortgage and a full retirement account sells neither. So the information ecosystem you are swimming in is not neutral. It has a current. That current pulls you toward the content that performs wealth best, which is disproportionately produced by people whose primary income is the performance itself. They are not rich from what they teach. They are rich, when they are rich at all, from the teaching. And the teaching must keep you watching, which means the teaching must keep you feeling like the answer is just one more video away. You are worth more to them as a watcher than you are as a success story. The most visible wealth is disproportionately concentrated among people who have made an audience the product. And their audience, which may include you, is learning what wealth looks like while being quietly pulled away from what wealth requires. In a later section, you are going to meet a claim about consistency that clashes with the familiar story. Specifically, the assumption that it requires discipline. After that really registers, it alters how you actually behave around money, day to day, without force. But for now, understand this one thing clearly. Boring is not a flaw in a financial strategy. It is the strategy. The fact that it has been made to feel like failure, like settling, like the behavior of someone who does not dream big enough. That is the most expensive lie the performance economy ever sold you. The question that opens the next chapter is simply this. If boring is the answer, why is it so hard to choose? Chapter 2. Charisma costs more than it earns. You already know the answer to that question. Why is it so hard to choose boring? You know it. And yet here you are, which means the problem is not information. Almost everyone who struggles financially believes the same thing about wealthy people. They believe wealthy people are magnetic. They believe wealth follows personality. That money gravitates toward the person who commands a room, who dresses well, who projects confidence so thick you can feel it from across the street. That belief is wrong. Not slightly wrong. Structurally, mechanically, mathematically wrong. What makes it dangerous is not that it feels good to believe it. What makes it dangerous is that acting on it costs you money. Real money, every month. And the bill arrives so quietly you never see it coming. This chapter is going to put a number on that belief. Here is the open question that will follow you through the next few pages. If charisma is so expensive, why do so many smart people keep paying for it? Hold that. The answer is not what you expect. First, Let us name the thing precisely. Charisma, in the context of wealth culture, is not a personality trait. It is a spending strategy. When you buy the car that says something about you, when you eat at the restaurant where being seen matters more than the food, when you wear the brand because of what the brand communicates to strangers, you are not expressing yourself. You are purchasing a signal. You are buying the right to be perceived a certain way. And that purchase never stops. It requires maintenance. It requires escalation. Because the signal degrades the moment someone newer, louder, or better dressed walks into the room. That escalation has a name in behavioral finance. It is called lifestyle inflation. And unlike the quiet compounding that builds real wealth, lifestyle inflation compounds in reverse. It does not add to what you have. It subtracts from what you could become. Bring to mind where things really stood back then, 3 years ago, as it really was. Think about what you were earning, what you were spending, and what the gap between those two numbers looked like. Now think about whether that gap has grown or shrunk. For most people in their 20s and early 30s, income rises and the gap stays the same or narrows. Spending rises to meet every new dollar before it can be saved. The raise arrives, and within 90 days it is already gone. Not stolen, spent, on things that were supposed to signal that the raise happened. That is not a character flaw. It is a mechanism, and understanding the mechanism is the only way to stop it. Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent decades studying millionaires across the United States. Their research, published under the title The Millionaire Next Door, produced a finding that surprised almost everyone who read it. The wealthiest households in America were not concentrated in the places you would expect. They were not in the luxury condominiums or the high-visibility neighborhoods. They were in ordinary houses on ordinary streets, driving ordinary cars, wearing ordinary clothes. The people who looked wealthy, who dressed the part, who drove the right vehicle and lived in the right zip code, were statistically less wealthy than the people who appeared to have nothing remarkable about them at all. The researchers coined a term for the high earners who consistently spent everything they made. They called them underaccumulators of wealth. And the most common trait those underaccumulators shared was not low income. It was high social visibility. Read that again, slowly. High social visibility predicted lower net worth. Now meet someone named Derek. Derek is 31 years old, and he is very good at his job. He works in commercial real estate in a mid-sized city, earns roughly $90,000 a year, and carries himself with the kind of confidence that makes people remember him. He discovered early in his career that how he looked and how he showed up mattered, so he invested. He bought a car that cost 40% of his annual salary. He moved into an apartment in the building everyone in his industry recognized. He bought clothes from the brands his clients wore. He joined the gym where deals got made in the sauna. He started going to the dinners, the events, the things that kept his name in rooms he was not physically in. His income grew because of it. He is certain of that. He went from $62,000 to $90,000 in 4 years, and he credits the visibility. He probably is not wrong about that. Here is what Derek has not calculated. His car payment is $700 a month. His apartment costs $1,800 a month more than a comparable unit 2 miles away. His clothing budget runs about $400 a month on average across the year. The gym is $250. The dinners and events, even being conservative, run another $300. That is $35,400 per year spent specifically on maintaining the signal, not on living, on being seen living. Derek earns $90,000. After tax, he takes home roughly $63,000. He is spending more than half of his take-home income on charisma maintenance. He has a retirement account with $11,000 in it. He is 31. He is not a cautionary tale. He is a very common story. The part that makes Derek's situation genuinely painful is this: the spending works in a narrow sense. People do see him, deals do happen, his income did grow. Charisma as a strategy is not a lie. It produces returns in certain contexts, but those returns require constant reinvestment. You cannot stop. The car gets old. The apartment needs to be in the right building. The clothes cycle out. The visibility has to be refreshed. It is not an asset. It is a subscription. Here is the financial principle underneath all of this. Compounding only works on what you keep. Interest does not accumulate on the money you spent last month to look like the person who would have earned more money this month. Wealth is not built on gross income. It is built on the retained portion of income, deployed over time, left alone long enough for the math to work in your favor. Every dollar diverted towards signal maintenance is a dollar that cannot compound. It is gone, not invested poorly. Gone. This is the invisible wealth behavior that most people never see because it is designed not to be seen. The people who are quietly building real financial security are not at the dinners. They are not in the buildings you would recognize. They are making decisions that look from the outside like nothing is happening, because nothing visible is happening. Everything is happening in the numbers. Before long, you are going to meet a claim about what it takes to earn more money that clashes with the familiar story. Once that becomes real to you, it alters what you actually do with your time each week. But right now, stay with this, because there is a cost beyond the dollars. When you organize your financial life around visibility, your decisions stop being made by you. They start being made by the room. You choose the car the room expects. You choose the neighborhood the room would approve of. You start filtering every financial decision through the question of what signal it sends. And that filter slowly replaces the question that actually matters. What does this do for my future? That replacement is gradual. You do not notice it happening. That is what makes it so effective at keeping people exactly where they are. Here is the answer to the open question. If charisma is so expensive, why do smart people keep paying for it? Because it pays out immediately. You feel the return the same day you make the purchase. You walk into a room in the right clothes and something shifts. People respond differently. That feeling is real and it is immediate, and the human brain assigns enormous weight to immediate feedback. The cost, however, is deferred. The cost shows up years from now in the retirement account that is too thin, the emergency fund that does not exist, the financial options that are not available. You do not feel the cost of lifestyle inflation today. You feel it later, and you feel it all at once. And by then, the habit is so built into your life that dismantling it feels like losing your identity. The person who chooses boring chooses deferred reward over immediate signal. That is not a personality trait either. It is a practice decision made with an understanding of how compounding actually works. There is a subject coming in the next chapter that most people would describe with one word: dull. It involves spreadsheets and patience, and a degree of routine that would bore most people into a nap. But inside that dullness is an unsexy edge so powerful that it outperforms almost every exciting financial strategy ever devised. And the reason it works is precisely because most people find it too uninteresting to sustain. Visibility is expensive. Quiet is cheap. And cheap, held long enough, becomes the most valuable thing you own. Chapter 3. Boring behaviors have unfair statistical advantages. Boring behavior builds more wealth than brilliant behavior. That sounds like a consolation prize for people without imagination. It is not. It is one of the most well-documented patterns in behavioral finance. Understanding why it works will change how you look at every financial decision you make from this point forward. Cheap, held long enough, becomes the most valuable thing you own. That came up right at the close of the last chapter. Maybe it landed as a nice idea, a satisfying phrase. But this chapter is where that idea stops being a phrase and starts being a mechanism. There is a reason boring behavior wins. It is not philosophical. It is statistical. It is mathematical. And once you see the math clearly, you will understand why the most overlooked word in personal finance is not invest or save or compound. The most overlooked word is variance. One unresolved question sits at the center of this chapter through everything that follows. Why does the person who does the same thing every month, without drama, without reinvention, without any visible hustle, end up with more money than the person working twice as hard, twice as visibly, with twice the strategy? Hold that question. Let it sit. The answer is closer than you think, but we are not ready for it yet. Meet Raymond. Raymond taught 7th grade science at the same public school in Central Ohio for 31 years. He drove a sedan he replaced every 10 years. He packed his lunch 4 days a week. He and his wife took one vacation per year, usually somewhere in driving distance. They owned a house that appreciated at roughly the national average. Raymond never started a business. He never invested in a friend's startup. He never flipped a property or traded options or discovered a high-yield account that nobody else knew about. At 58, Raymond's net worth crossed $2.4 million. No inheritance, no windfall, no single decision that changed everything. His closest colleague, a man named Derek who spent 20 years talking about the side business he was going to launch, retired with $40,000 in savings and a pension he was terrified to outlive. Same salary range, same city, 31 years of time. The difference between Raymond and Derek was not intelligence. Derek was sharp. It was not ambition. Derek had plenty. The difference was a single behavioral pattern that Raymond maintained without drama and Derek never quite started. Raymond automated $300 per month into a low-cost index fund starting at age 26. He never touched it. He never looked at it during market drops. He increased the contribution by $50 every time he got a small raise. That was it. That was the whole strategy. Think about how unimpressive that sounds when you read it aloud. Now think about $300 a month, invested consistently, growing at an average market return over 32 years. The number stops sounding unimpressive very quickly. But this chapter is not really about the math of compound interest. You have heard that before. This chapter is about why most people cannot do what Raymond did, even when they know the math. And the answer lives in a concept that most financial advice never bothers to explain, because it is not exciting enough to sell. The concept is variance. In statistics, variance measures how widely a set of outcomes spreads around its average. High variance means your results swing wildly. Low variance means your results stay close to each other, predictable and steady. When you look at two investors over time, the one with higher average returns does not always win. The one with lower variance often does. Low variance keeps you in the game. It means you do not panic and sell at the bottom. You do not chase a hot tip and lose 18 months of gains in a week. You do not stop investing because life got complicated. Low variance is quiet. Low variance is boring. Low variance is exactly what Raymond had. Here is what almost nobody tells you. Boring is not a personality type. Boring is a behavioral description of low variance. When someone calls your financial strategy boring, they are describing the statistical shape of your outcomes without knowing it. They are telling you, without meaning to, that you are doing it right. That is the reversal you need to carry through the rest of this book. Go back to where things really stood back then, 3 years ago, as it really was. Not just financially. Think about what you were paying attention to. What financial moves were you excited about? What strategies were you researching at midnight? Were those strategies producing steady, unremarkable, automatic results? Or were they producing the kind of results you would have a story to tell about, whether that story ended well or not? Most people, when they look back honestly, can trace their financial stagnation not to laziness, but to stimulation. They were not lazy. They were engaged with the wrong thing. They were generating heat and calling it momentum. Here is a number that deserves more attention than it gets. A study of retail brokerage accounts found that the most actively traded accounts underperformed the least actively traded accounts by roughly 2 percentage points per year. 2% sounds modest. Run it over 2 decades and it does not sound modest at all. 2% annually, compounded over 20 years, is not a minor gap. It is the difference between a retirement and a shortfall. And the accounts that underperformed were not managed by uninformed people. They were managed by people who were paying close attention, making decisions, staying engaged. The very behavior that felt like diligence was producing the drag. The invisible wealth behavior this whole book is building toward is exactly this. Doing less, but doing it consistently. Choosing the option that requires no story. Choosing the option that, if someone asked you what your strategy was at a dinner party, would end the conversation in 30 seconds. Raymond, if you asked him, would say he never found investing interesting. He would say it with no shame. He set it up once, confirmed it was working once a year, and spent his actual mental energy on things he cared about. His students, his garden, his wife's cooking. He did not experience his financial life as a discipline. He experienced it as background noise. And background noise, running for 30 years, became $2.4 million. This is the principle that most wealth content refuses to state plainly, because it does not generate engagement. The financial behaviors that feel the most boring in the moment are boring precisely because they have low emotional variance. And low emotional variance is the psychological signature of a behavior you will actually maintain. You will not maintain what exhausts you. You will not maintain what requires reinvention every 6 months. You will maintain what barely registers. And what barely registers over decades produces the only results worth having. Let that land for a moment before moving forward. The villain in this story is not laziness. It is not ignorance. The villain is a culture that has made the performance of financial activity look like the activity itself. You have seen it. Somebody posts about their portfolio. Somebody documents their side income. Somebody shares their morning routine and their investment dashboard and the notification from their brokerage. The content is not about building wealth. The content is about the appearance of building wealth. That is a fundamentally different product. One produces net worth. The other produces followers. What the visibility culture never shows you is the statistical cost of staying engaged at that level. Every decision you make about money costs you something, even when the decision is correct. Researchers call this decision fatigue, but it is simpler than that. Every time you touch your financial plan, you introduce the possibility of changing it. And most changes to a working financial plan are net negatives, not because people are foolish, because a plan interrupted is a plan degraded. Raymond's 2.4 million is not just the result of compound interest. It is the result of 32 years of decisions not made. That is the unfair statistical advantage of boring behavior. It is not just that boring behavior produces better average returns. It is that boring behavior survives. It survives job changes and market corrections and divorces and medical bills and moments of panic and moments of irrational optimism. Exciting strategies do not survive those moments at the same rate. Exciting strategies require the conditions that created them to persist. Boring strategies ask almost nothing of the conditions. They run in any weather. Now go back to the question you were asked to hold at the beginning of this chapter. Why does the person doing the same unremarkable thing every month end up with more money than the person working twice as hard with twice the strategy? The answer is variance. The person working hard with a complex strategy has high variance. High variance means some months they execute brilliantly and some months they stumble. Some years they are in the market and some years they are out. Some periods they are adding to their position and some periods they are pulling back to reassess. All of that movement feels like activity. All of that activity costs something, and the cost accumulates in the one place it never shows up on a statement. It accumulates in missed compounding. The months out of the market, the capital sitting in cash while the plan gets revised, the gains lost to a repositioning fee. These are invisible costs, and invisible costs are the ones most people never count. Down the line in this book, you are going to meet a claim about risk that clashes with the familiar story. When that idea snaps into focus, it alters how you decide where to put your money. For now, the principle of this chapter is this: boring is a behavioral description of low variance. And low variance is the mathematical signature of a strategy that compounds. Raymond did not build $2.4 million by being exceptional. He built it by being consistent in a way that almost nobody around him could sustain. The edge was not in the investment vehicle. The edge was in the behavior. The unsexy edge is the only edge that lasts. What does it feel like to be the most boring investor you know? Chapter 4. The unsexy edge nobody wants to hear. Something is leaving your account right now, not being stolen, not lost to some dramatic crash or bad luck story, just leaving, quietly and on schedule like a bill you forgot you agreed to pay. Every week you spend inside a financial strategy built on watching, waiting, and reacting is a week where the only thing compounding is the distance between where you are and where you could be. The gap does not announce itself. It does not send a warning. It just widens. And the invisible mechanism driving that widening is not bad luck. It is not bad income. It is an information vacuum. Specifically, the absence of one piece of knowledge that almost no financial content ever shows you, because it does not make for good content. What actually builds wealth is so structurally uninteresting that the people who practice it rarely get invited onto podcasts, and yet their accounts grow in ways that make headline investors look average. This chapter is about what those people actually do, not what they say. What they do. That question at the end of the last chapter is worth sitting with for a moment. What does it feel like to be the most boring investor you know? Because the answer most people give is somewhere between embarrassed and defensive. Boring sounds like settling, like you missed the real play. Like everyone else is at a party you were not invited to, and you are home in bed at 9:30 refreshing the same low-cost index fund you bought 3 years ago and will buy again next Tuesday. Here is what almost no one tells you about that feeling. It is a signal, not of failure but of proximity. The closer you are to actual wealth-building behavior, the more boring it looks from the outside. And the further you are from it, the more exciting the alternatives appear. That is not an accident. That is the architecture of the system you are living inside. Let me introduce you to Raymond. Raymond is 41 years old. He lives in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, drives a 9-year-old Subaru, and works as a systems analyst for a hospital network. His salary is solid but unremarkable, around $78,000 a year. He has never started a company. He has never flipped a property in a hot market. He has never gone viral, never been featured in a local business magazine, never given a talk at a conference. He does not have a personal brand. What Raymond has is a net worth of just over $900,000 at age 41. His coworkers, most of whom earn within $10,000 of what Raymond earns, have a median net worth closer to $80,000. Same city, same employer, roughly the same income for roughly the same number of years. The difference between Raymond and his coworkers is not dramatic. It is not a story anyone would optionally watch, but it is enormous, and it is real. And it comes down to 5 specific behaviors that Raymond executes so consistently they have become invisible to him. He does not think of them as strategies. He thinks of them as is normal. The first behavior is automatic investment. On the 15th of every month, before Raymond touches his paycheck for anything else, a fixed amount moves from his checking account into a low-cost index fund. He set this up 11 years ago and has changed it exactly twice, both times to increase the amount. He does not decide to invest each month. He does not evaluate market conditions. He does not ask himself whether now is a good time. The decision was made once, 11 years ago, and it executes on its own while Raymond is doing other things. His money does not wait for his attention. It moves. This matters more than it sounds. Research on investor behavior consistently shows that one of the primary destroyers of long-term returns is not the market, it is the investor. The pauses, the hesitations, the moments where someone decides to wait until things settle down. Each of those pauses is a day the money sits still. And still money in a compounding system is losing. Raymond eliminated the pause entirely. Not through discipline, through design. Remember where things really stood back then, 3 years ago, as it really was. Not in general terms specifically. What was your financial behavior in that period? Were you investing consistently? Or were you investing when it felt right, when you had extra, when the news did not feel too loud? Because 3 years of inconsistent behavior versus 3 years of automatic behavior produce account balances that barely resemble each other, even with identical income. That gap is already decided by the behavior you chose back then. The gap 3 years from now is being decided right now. The second behavior is no active trading. Raymond does not buy individual stocks. He does not move in and out of positions based on earnings reports or economic forecasts. He does not have a trading app on his phone. This is not because Raymond lacks intelligence or lacks access to information. It is because Raymond understands something that the financial media industry depends on you never fully internalizing. Most active traders underperform the plain index they are trying to beat. Not occasionally. Consistently. Over 10-year periods, the data is not close. And yet the entire architecture of financial content, the alerts, the analysis, the breaking news segments, is built on the premise that paying close attention and acting on what you learn will improve your results. Raymond opted out of that premise entirely. His results, by most measures, are better than those of people who opted in. Here is the open loop this chapter needs you to hold. If the behaviors that produce wealth are this simple, why are they not the primary content of every financial platform you have ever used? Sit with that question. We will come back to it before this chapter ends. The third behavior is low debt relative to income. Raymond has a mortgage. He paid off his car 3 years before he bought the Subaru. He has no credit card balance. This is not because Raymond hates debt on principle. He understands that some debt is structural and necessary. It is because he ran the math early. Carrying consumer debt at 18% interest while trying to build wealth at 7% average annual return is financial subtraction dressed up as normal adult life. The interest payments on debt do not just cost money. They cost the compounding that money would have done. Raymond stopped paying that cost. He does not feel virtuous about it. It just made the math work. The fourth behavior is high income retention. Raymond spends less than he earns consistently by a significant margin. Not through deprivation. Raymond eats well, travels occasionally, and replaced his roof without financial stress. But he never inflated his lifestyle to match his raises. When his salary increased 6 years ago, his spending did not. That gap between income and spending is where everything that matters financially lives. Wealth is not built in the earning. It is built in the keeping. Raymond keeps more than almost everyone he knows, not because he earns more, but because the gap between his earning and his spending is deliberately wide and has been for over a decade. The fifth behavior is late spending on status. Raymond did not buy a new car when his peers did. He did not upgrade his neighborhood when his salary justified it. He waited. Not forever, but longer than felt natural, longer than felt socially comfortable, longer than most people are willing to wait. In that waiting, the money he did not spend on early status symbols was compounding quietly in an account that no one could see. The social cost of that delay is real. Raymond will tell you that. There were moments where he felt behind, where the Subaru felt like an announcement of something he had not chosen to announce. But the financial result of that delay is also real. And by now, the two realities have separated completely. The people who bought earlier are making payments. Raymond is making investments. None of these 5 behaviors are secret. You have probably heard versions of all of them before. None of them require special access, special income, or special intelligence. And yet, when you look at the financial content ecosystem that most people in your age range consume daily, the reels, the threads, the videos with 6-figure view counts, these 5 behaviors are almost entirely absent, because they do not make content. There is no narrative arc in automatic investment. There is no drama in not trading. There is no hook in the fact that Raymond drove the same car for 9 years while his net worth climbed toward $1 million. These behaviors resist being told as stories because nothing happens in them. They just repeat. And that is the revelation. The behaviors that produce wealth are unappealing to report because they require no narrative arc. They just repeat. Media cannot monetize repetition. Media monetizes novelty, surprise, reversal, and crisis. The financial content you consume is not selected for its accuracy in representing wealth-building behavior. It is selected for its ability to keep your attention. And the behaviors that keep your attention are precisely the behaviors most likely to interrupt compounding. Watching disrupts accumulating. Every hour spent consuming financial content that celebrates complexity is an hour not spent executing simplicity. Now, back to the question this chapter asked you to hold. Why are these behaviors not the primary content of every financial platform? The answer is structural. Simple behaviors that repeat do not generate engagement. They do not generate clicks, shares, or return visits. A platform that told you to set up an automatic investment and then stop watching would lose you as an audience immediately. Its entire business model depends on you continuing to feel like there is something you need to know, something you need to act on, something you are missing. Raymond is not missing it. Raymond left that loop years ago, and his account balance is the receipt. The unsexy edge is not a personality type. It is not a gift some people are born with and others are not. It is a set of specific repeating behaviors that produce results so slowly and so quietly that they never trend. They never get shared. They never get celebrated. Until one day, someone like Raymond is sitting across from a financial advisor doing an annual review, and the number on the screen stops the conversation. Boring built that number. What would your number look like if you had started being boring 3 years earlier? Chapter 5. Consistency wins because everyone else quits. Showing up less skillfully than your competitors for longer than your competitors will make you wealthier than almost all of them. That sounds like an excuse for mediocrity. It is the opposite. It is a precise description of how the math of wealth accumulation actually works, and most people never hold anything long enough to see what the light reveals. The question from the last chapter stays with you now. What would your number look like if you had started 3 years earlier? Sit with that for a moment. Not to punish yourself, to feel the weight of what time does when you work with it. This chapter is about what happens when you decide you will not ask that question again in another 3 years. This chapter is about the one edge that requires no talent, no connections, no inherited advantage, and no exceptional intelligence. It only requires that you remain. Here is the thing most people miss about consistency. They think of it as a personal virtue like patience or discipline, something that reflects well on your character. That framing is wrong. And the wrong framing is why so many people fail to stay consistent. Consistency in the context of building wealth is not a character trait. It is a competitive strategy. It works not because of what it does to your money, but because of what it does to the field of people competing alongside you. Hold this question with you for the next few minutes. Why do the most ordinary financial behaviors, the ones anyone could perform, produce extraordinary separation in outcomes over time? The answer is not what you think it is. Imagine 100 people, same city, roughly the same income bracket, all somewhere in their mid-20s. On a given January 1st, all 100 decide to do something financially consistent. Maybe they open an investment account. Maybe they commit to putting $300 away every single month without exception. Same decision, same starting line, same intention. By month 6, 15 of them have already stopped. Not dramatically, no announcement, no failure, just a gradual fade. The account gets ignored. The transfer gets skipped once, then twice, then the habit dissolves like it was never there. Some had an unexpected expense. Some got distracted. Some simply forgot what the original intention felt like. By the end of year 1, 68 people are still going. That sounds like a majority. Hold that thought. By year 3, that number is down to 31. Half of those 68 people who made it through the first year quit somewhere in the second or third. A promotion came. A new relationship started. A shiny financial idea arrived and looked more exciting than the boring thing they were doing. The boring thing got abandoned. The shiny idea eventually did too. By year 5, 19 people remain. By year 10, you are looking at 7. 7 people out of 100 who started in the same place with the same tools on the same day. And Raymond is one of them. Raymond 𝗏𝗧𝗔𝗡 worked in logistics coordination for a mid-sized distribution company outside of Columbus, Ohio. not a flashy career. Solid pay, predictable schedule, zero public recognition. He opened a basic brokerage account at 26 with $400, not because he had read a compelling book or attended a seminar. He opened it because his coworker Marcus mentioned it over lunch one Tuesday, and Raymond thought it seemed reasonable. That was the whole story. No dramatic epiphany, no rock-bottom moment that shocked him into action. What Raymond had was a particular kind of stubbornness. The kind that is not loud, not dramatic, and mostly just looks like someone who is slightly less distractible than the people around him. Every month the transfer went through. Some months it was hard. The year he had to replace his transmission, it was hard. The year his mother got sick and he flew home 3 times, it was hard. He lowered the amount twice during those stretches. He never stopped. By the time Raymond was 36, Marcus, the same coworker who first mentioned the account, had long since cashed out his own. Marcus had a reason each time. The reasons were real. The pattern was still the pattern. Raymond had not become a better investor than Marcus. He had simply remained one. That is the story. The lesson is not what Raymond did with his money. The lesson is what happened to everyone else while Raymond kept going. Look back at the shape of your life back then, 3 years ago, as it really was. What financial habit did you start and abandon? Not because you were lazy, not because you were reckless, but because life had its own momentum and the habit did not have enough roots yet to hold. Most people have a version of this story. The account they opened and stopped feeding. The budget they kept for 42 days before it slipped. The automatic transfer they canceled because they told themselves they would restart it later, and later never arrived with the same urgency. You are not unusual for having that story. 93 out of 100 people have that story. That is exactly the point. When 93 people exit a race, the 7 who stayed did not win because they ran faster. They won because the race continued while the others stopped watching. Wealth does not wait for the people who left to come back. It just keeps moving in the direction of whoever stayed on the track. This is what makes consistency a moat, in the specific competitive sense of that word. A moat is not a skill. It is a barrier. It protects your position not by making you stronger, but by making it harder for others to match you. The longer you hold a consistent behavior, the higher your moat grows, not because your behavior improves dramatically, but because the field of people still executing that behavior shrinks every single year. By year 10, you are not competing with 100 people anymore. You are competing with 6 others. And you already have a decade of quiet compounding behind you. The unsexy edge did not require you to outthink anyone. It required you to outlast almost everyone. Now here is where the counterintuitive part sharpens into something you can use. Most people try to stay consistent through motivation. They return to their why, listen to a podcast, revisit their goals, try to reignite the original feeling. This works for a while. The problem is that motivation is a renewable resource that requires constant renewal. You have to go back and get more of it. The people who quit in year 2 did not quit because they stopped caring. They quit because they ran out of motivation on a Tuesday when nothing particularly dramatic was happening, and caring was not enough to move the money automatically. The people who remained did not stay through motivation. They stayed through structure. The transfer was automatic. The account was separate from the account they spent from. The decision had been made once properly and did not require remaking. Raymond did not think about his investment account the way most people think about their goals, as something to be pursued actively. He thought about it the way he thought about his electric bill. It just happened. Month after month, quietly, without ceremony, without reward. This is the architecture of persistence, not willpower, not passion. A structure so simple that quitting it requires more effort than continuing. Here is something worth sitting with. The visibility and hustle story that surrounds wealth tells you that the people who win are the ones who want it most, who grind hardest, who talk about their goals with the most fire. But desire without architecture produces intensity in short bursts followed by long silences. The person who shows up every day at 70% effort, inside a system that does not depend on their daily emotional state, will accumulate more than the person who shows up at 110% 3 times a week and then disappears for 2 months. Consistency does not require excellence. It requires presence. Now close the loop. Why do the most ordinary financial behaviors produce extraordinary separation over time? Not because the behaviors are secretly powerful in ways you cannot see. The behaviors are genuinely ordinary. A regular contribution to an index fund is not a sophisticated strategy. A monthly transfer to a separate account is not a secret technique. The reason ordinary behaviors produce extraordinary separation is that extraordinary numbers of people abandon them. The behavior is not rare. The sustained execution of the behavior is. That is the whole mechanism. That is the answer to the question you have been carrying. What you are building by choosing consistent boring behavior is not just a balance. You are building distance. Every year you remain in the 7, the 93 who left fall further behind. Not because they are bad with money, not because they lack intelligence, but because time works differently for people who are still in the compound than for people who left. Time compounds for the ones who stayed. Time simply passes for everyone else. A little later, we will reach an idea about motivation and financial discipline that clashes with the familiar story. Once that lands, it starts changing how you make decisions under pressure. For now, hold this one truth clearly. Consistency is not a virtue. It is a competitive strategy. And the competition thins itself. Your only job is to still be standing when the field clears. The people who call your financial habits boring are, in many cases, no longer in the race. What will your balance say in year 10 to everyone who quit in year 3? Chapter 6. Stimulation is the enemy of compounding. Right now, while you are listening to this, something is draining from your financial life. Not dramatically, not all at once. It is leaving the way water leaves a cracked reservoir slowly, constantly, in a way that is easy to miss, until the level is suddenly, undeniably lower than it should be. What you are losing is not money. Not yet. What you are losing is compounding time. And compounding time is the only resource that, once spent, cannot be bought back at any price. Every week you spend starting over, new plan, new platform, new angle, is a week your money and your effort are not stacking on what came before. They are starting from zero again. The cost is not this week's earnings. It is the tower of wealth those earnings would have built across the next decade. That tower does not collapse loudly. It simply never rises. And the mechanism responsible for keeping it flat is one most people never name, because it does not feel like self-destruction. It feels like ambition. Your balance in year 10 will answer a question you are carrying right now. The previous chapter asked what that balance would say to everyone who quit in year 3. This chapter is going to show you what is actually preventing you from getting there. It is not laziness. It is not lack of opportunity. It is something far more seductive than either of those things. The question worth sitting with, and do not answer it yet, is this. How many times have you started over in the last 5 years? Not failed, not been defeated, started over, hold that number. There is a man worth understanding here. His name is Marcus. By any reasonable measure, Marcus looks like someone who is winning. He is sharp. He is energetic. He talks about money the way people talk about a sport they genuinely love, with fluency and heat and specific detail. In 8 years, Marcus has built 12 distinct income streams. He has sold handmade goods online, flipped electronics, launched a fitness coaching program, tried wholesaling, started a newsletter, ran paid ads for local businesses, dabbled in crypto trading, consulted for 2 startups, built a dropshipping store, created a course about dropshipping, relaunched the newsletter under a different name, and most recently begun posting content about passive income. He has worked hard the entire time. He has learned something real from every single one of those ventures. His total income across those 8 years is higher than his neighbor Raymond's total income over the same period. Raymond is quieter. Raymond picked one thing: a small index fund contribution pulled automatically from every paycheck, and a single rental property he bought in year 2 and has not sold. Raymond does not talk about money at social gatherings. Raymond's financial life is, by most people's definition, boring. Marcus's net worth is roughly half of Raymond's. Let that land for a moment. Same 8 years. Higher total income for Marcus. Half the wealth. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is not work ethic. The difference is compounding, and specifically, it is the number of times each man reset his compounding clock. Here is what compounding actually requires. This is the part most people have heard, but very few have internalized at the level that changes their behavior. Compounding is not simply the math of returns building on returns. That is the surface description. The deeper requirement of compounding is time spent not interrupting it. Every financial vehicle that compounds, every investment account, every growing business, every appreciating asset functions like a living system that builds structural momentum the longer it runs uninterrupted. The first year of growth is small. The 3rd year is larger. The 7th year is where the structure begins to feel genuinely significant. The 10th year is where people look at it and call the person who built it lucky. But you have to be in it on year 7 to see year 10. You have to be in it on year 4 to reach year 7. And you cannot be in it on year 4 if you pivoted on year 2. Every pivot resets the clock. This is not metaphor. This is arithmetic. When Marcus launched his fitness coaching program and then abandoned it after 8 months to pursue wholesale, he did not simply change directions. He erased 8 months of compounding momentum that had started to build inside that business. The brand recognition, the returning clients, the word-of-mouth referrals that were just beginning to move, gone. He started the wholesale business at 0, not at 8 months, at 0. His energy had been spent. His time had been spent. The compounding had not. Now think about your own life. Think honestly about the last 3 years, not the version you explain to other people, but the actual sequence of what you started and what you left. How many things did you begin that had real potential, that you invested real effort into, that you moved away from before they had time to compound? There is no judgment in that question, only recognition. Because the force that pulled you away from those things is not personal weakness. It is biological. It is the same mechanism that makes every human being on the planet reach for the phone when there is a quiet moment. It is the craving for novelty. And it is, without question, the most expensive habit most people in your generation are carrying. Your brain is not designed for compounding. This is important enough to say plainly. The architecture of your mind evolved to reward new information, new stimulation, new signal. A new idea feels better than an old one, chemically. Starting over has an emotional freshness that continuing does not. The dopamine response to a brand new plan is higher than the dopamine response to maintaining a steady, functioning one. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a feature of human neurology, one that served your ancestors well in environments where novelty meant survival. But in a financial environment, that same craving acts like a toxin inside compounding cycles. Every time you encounter friction in something you have been building, and friction always comes always on a predictable schedule, your brain offers you an exit that feels like wisdom. It calls it reassessment. It calls it adaptation. It frames a reset as strategy. The language sounds responsible. The cost is enormous. Marcus does not think of himself as someone who quits. That is what makes his story so important. He genuinely believes each pivot was justified. And some of them probably were, in isolation. But the pattern itself is the problem. A single strategic pivot in 8 years is prudent. 12 pivots in 8 years is stimulation addiction wearing the clothing of entrepreneurship. Here is the contradiction most people in wealth culture never confront. The platforms and communities and content ecosystems that teach you about building wealth are themselves built on novelty. They have to be. A new strategy gets clicks. A fresh take gets shares. A pivot story performs better than a stay-the-course story because staying the course produces no shareable moment. You cannot post a video called, "I did the exact same thing again this month," and expect it to reach anyone. The architecture of information rewards the new. And you are swimming in that architecture every day. So you absorb, constantly, a curriculum of pivots. You see people celebrate their new direction. You see the energy and momentum of a fresh start. You almost never see the quiet, invisible, deeply unglamorous reality of the person who is in year 6 of the same thing, watching the numbers compound past the point where the early years of struggle feel like they happen to a different person. That person does not make content about it, because there is nothing visually interesting to show. The most powerful financial behavior in your generation is also the least documented. Further on, we will reach an idea about financial risk that clashes with the familiar story. When that becomes clear, it starts changing how you calculate every decision involving money. For now, come back to that question from earlier. How many times have you started over in the last 5 years? Because here is what that number is actually telling you. It is not measuring your ambition. It is measuring the gap between where your wealth is and where it would be if each of those starts had been allowed to run long enough to compound. Every entry in that count is a clock that was reset. Every reset is a year that did not build on the year before it. The unsexy truth about the people who build serious wealth quietly is that they are not more talented than Marcus. They are not luckier than Marcus. They are more resistant to the pull of the new. They have developed through intention or through circumstance or sometimes through sheer stubbornness. The ability to stay in the friction without interpreting it as a signal to leave. When the excitement of a new venture fades, as it always does around month 4 or month 7, they do not reach for a replacement. They reach for patience. And patience in a compounding system is not a soft virtue. It is a mechanical requirement. Without it, the math simply does not work. The boring people do not find their strategy more exciting than Marcus finds his. They find it more trustworthy. That is a different relationship with a plan entirely. Excitement is about how a thing feels to start. Trust is about what you believe it will do over time, even when it feels like nothing. Excitement is stimulation. Trust is compounding's best friend. Marcus is not lost. Marcus is not broken. But until Marcus understands that his energy and his intelligence are being systematically redirected by a craving his brain cannot distinguish from ambition, he will keep earning more and accumulating less. The compounding clock does not wait. What would your financial life look like today if your last reset had never happened? Chapter 7. The Wealth They Never Post About. Hiding money is one of the most effective wealth-building strategies ever discovered. That sounds like advice for someone with something to hide. It is not. It is an observation about how the people who actually accumulate significant wealth behave differently than the people who merely look like they have. The difference is not subtle. It is structural. Once you understand why concealment is rational, not modest, you will start to see that every dollar you spend proving your financial status is a dollar you are actively removing from the machine that builds it. This chapter is about where real wealth actually lives. It does not live where you have been looking. That question from the last chapter is still sitting with you, whether you realize it or not. What would your financial life look like today if your last reset had never happened? Hold that. The reset might have been a debt spiral, a bad investment, a period of spending that matched an image you were trying to project. Whatever the shape of it, most financial resets share one common trigger. Not bad luck, not low income. The trigger is almost always visibility spending, buying the appearance of a life rather than the architecture of one. One question stays deliberately open through this section while the chapter unfolds. There is a specific type of person who has accumulated more money than almost anyone you follow online, and you have almost certainly never thought about them once. By the end of this chapter, you will know exactly who they are, and why their anonymity is not an accident. Start with what you already know. You know someone who seems wealthy, maybe several people. The car is right, the clothes are right, the posts have the right light and the right location. You do not know their balance sheet. You do not know whether the car is leased, whether the watch is financed, whether the vacation was paid for with points borrowed against future income. What you see is a signal. What you cannot see is the cost of producing that signal. Now picture something different. Picture a gravel company in central Ohio. No logo you would recognize. No Instagram presence. The founder, a man named Curtis, started it in 1987 with one truck, a handshake agreement with a county road contractor, and about $11,000 he had saved over 4 years working in a quarry. Curtis did not have a pitch deck. He did not have a personal brand. He had a truck, a contract, and the knowledge that roads in Ohio were not going to stop needing gravel anytime soon. Curtis expanded slowly. 1 truck became 3. 3 became 8. He hired drivers he could trust, paid them slightly above market because turnover was expensive and loyalty was cheap by comparison. He never advertised. His growth came from county contracts and referrals from contractors who liked that Curtis showed up when he said he would. He did not have a website until 2011, and only then because his daughter built one for him as a birthday gift. By the time Curtis sold the business in 2019, the company was generating just over $12 million annually in revenue, with margins that made the accountant who reviewed the sale documents quietly envious. Curtis walked away with a number he has never said publicly, because Curtis does not talk publicly about money. He drives a 10-year-old Ford F-250. He lives in the same house he bought in 1993. His neighbors do not know. Let that sit for a moment. Curtis is not famous. Curtis is not aspirational in any way the internet would recognize. He does not have a newsletter about entrepreneurship. He has not given a TED talk about grit. He is, by every visible measure, unremarkable. And that unremarkability is inseparable from how he built what he built. Return to the shape of your life back then, 3 years ago, as it really was. Think about what you were measuring yourself against. What images were you consuming that told you what success was supposed to look like at your age? What did you buy or want to buy because it represented arrival? Most people, if they are honest, can name at least one thing, one purchase, one subscription, one choice that was made for an audience and not for themselves. That is the mirror. Not a flattering one, but an honest one. The wealth concealment pattern is not unique to Curtis. It shows up with striking consistency among people who accumulate real, durable net worth over time. They tend to own businesses in sectors that no one finds interesting: self-storage facilities, pest control franchises, commercial cleaning companies, parking lots, coin-operated laundry chains. These businesses do not generate social media content because there is nothing to film. There is no product launch. There is no lifestyle signal. There is only the quiet arrival of cash month after month, compounding in accounts that no one is watching. This is the unsexy edge. The sectors that attract the most attention attract the most competition, the most over-evaluation, and the most status spending. When everyone wants to be in a space, prices go up, margins compress, and the need to signal credibility within that space inflates the cost of participation. You have to look the part. You have to go to the conferences, stay in the right hotels, wear the right things to the right dinners. The performance of being in that world becomes a tax on actually building within it. Meanwhile, the gravel business does not have a conference. The storage facility does not have an influencer ecosystem. The pest control franchise does not require you to buy anything to prove you belong. These businesses demand exactly one thing from their owners: competent, consistent execution over a long period of time. Not charisma, not aesthetics, not an origin story worth posting. Just the kind of showing up that is too mundane to document and too effective to dismiss. Now, wealth concealment among high net worth individuals is not purely a psychological habit. It is a rational calculation, even if it is rarely made consciously. When you display wealth, you attract a specific and costly set of social pressures. Family members begin to factor your resources into their plans. Friends recalibrate their expectations. Social circles quietly reorganize around the assumption that you can carry more than your share. The visible wealthy person gets asked to invest in ideas that are more flattery than business. They get nudged toward donations that serve someone else's optics. They get pulled into lifestyle orbits that require maintenance spending just to remain in them. This is not cynicism. It is physics. Visible accumulation creates social gravity. And social gravity is expensive. The invisible accumulator avoids most of this, not through deception but through simple silence. They do not announce. They do not post. They do not reference their financial position in the way that invites renegotiation of every relationship. They keep the same friends, the same routines, the same modest external signals. And while their social world stays stable and low cost, their accounts continue to do what accounts do when you leave them alone long enough. Soon, we will reach an idea about the relationship between ambition and wealth that clashes with the familiar story. After that clicks, it starts changing how you set your goals. But right now, stay with this. There is a woman named Diane who owns 11 self-storage facilities across 3 states. She bought the first one in 2003 because she noticed that people in her town had more stuff than their houses could hold and nowhere to put it. Not a sophisticated insight, a simple one. She financed the first facility conservatively, kept her own job for 2 years to stabilize the cash flow, and reinvested every dollar the facility generated back into debt reduction, and then into a second property, then a third. Diane does not post about this. She has a personal social media account where she occasionally shares photos of her garden and her grandchildren. No one who follows her would guess. Her storage facilities have no collective brand. Each one operates under a different local name she chose specifically, so they would feel like neighborhood businesses rather than a portfolio. She tells people she is in real estate if they ask, which is technically true and practically anonymous. The facilities now generate enough passive income each month that Diane could stop working entirely and maintain her current life for the next 40 years without touching principal. She is 53. She does not plan to stop working, but the option exists because she spent 20 years building something no one was watching. Here is what Curtis and Diane share that matters more than their industries, their starting capital, or their geography. Neither of them spent money to look like they were building wealth. Neither of them entered a spending orbit that required them to maintain an image. Neither of them allowed the performance of success to consume the resources that produce it. They kept their expenses stable. They kept their signals quiet. They let compounding do the thing that compounding does when you do not interrupt it. This is not a personality type. This is a behavior pattern, and behavior patterns are available to anyone willing to adopt them. The visibility equals value myth tells you that the person with the most followers is winning. It tells you that the entrepreneur with the most press is the most successful. It tells you that the professional who looks most prosperous in a room is the most financially secure. Every one of these assumptions is measurably false on average, and you already know it. You have met people who look successful and are broke. The evidence is not hidden. The myth persists anyway because the myth is emotionally satisfying in a way the truth is not. The truth is slow. The truth involves a gravel truck and a storage unit and a pest control route. The truth does not photograph well. But here is what the truth does. The truth compounds. Every month that you are not spending to prove something, that money is working. Every year that your lifestyle cost stays below your income, the gap widens between what you have and what the image builders have, even if they are earning more than you. The gap widens because compounding is not impressed by how much you earn. Compounding only cares about what you keep and how long you keep it undisturbed. Remember the open loop from the beginning of this chapter. The type of person who has accumulated more money than almost anyone you follow online and who you have never thought about once. That is Curtis. That is Diane. That is the owner of the commercial cleaning company who gets his kids to school on time every day and does not own a single thing you would want to photograph. These people are not hiding because they are ashamed. They are not quiet because they lack confidence. They are invisible because invisibility in the financial world is a compounding advantage. Every year they spend off the radar is a year the radar cannot cost them anything. Boring, it turns out, is not an insult. It is a description of the conditions under which wealth actually grows. The question worth carrying into the next chapter is this: what are you currently spending to be seen? And what would happen to your financial position if you spent that on silence instead? Chapter 8. Your identity is spending money you haven't earned. Money you will never see is leaving your account right now. Not through fraud, not through emergency, through identity. Every month, a portion of what you earn is quietly redirected away from your future and toward the performance of a version of yourself that other people barely notice and will not remember. That cost is not a one-time subtraction. It compounds backward. The $50 spent last month on something you bought because of how it would look is not just $50. It is the $80 it would have become. It is the $120 that would have followed. It is gone without drama, without a funeral, without anyone naming the loss out loud. The invisible mechanism behind it is not weakness, not laziness, not a lack of discipline. It is identity. Specifically, it is the spending floor your identity has quietly installed inside you without your knowledge or your consent. That floor is what this chapter is about. When that clicks, you will not be able to unsee it after that. You carried a question out of the last chapter. What are you spending to be seen? And what would happen to your financial life if you spent that on silence instead? Hold that question. The answer is coming. But first, you need to understand why the spending happens before you can understand what stopping it actually requires. Go back to Marcus. You met Marcus earlier in this book. He was the one who looked right. The car was current. The clothes were calibrated. The apartment said something before he had to say anything himself. The picture was almost believable. What it did not show was the calculation happening beneath it. Not a financial calculation, an identity one. Marcus grew up in a house where money was scarce and visible struggle was a form of humiliation. He watched his father come home in work clothes that announced what he did for a living before he ever spoke. He watched his mother buy the store-brand version of everything and hide the packaging before guests arrived. He internalized something specific from that childhood. Not the lesson that money was hard to earn. The lesson that poverty was visible and visibility was punishment. So when Marcus started earning real money in his mid-20s, the spending did not feel like luxury. It felt like escape. Every purchase was a vote against the version of himself he was terrified of becoming again. The new watch was not vanity. It was a fence. The apartment in the right neighborhood was not ambition. It was armor. Here is what made Marcus different from a simple overspender. He was not buying things he loved. He was buying proof. There is a distance between those two things as wide as any financial decision you will ever make. By 31, Marcus had a salary that put him in the top 20% of earners in his city. He also had $11,000 in savings and a net worth that was, generously calculated, close to zero. The salary flowed in. The identity consumed it. The consumption was so automatic, so embedded in how he understood himself, that the word budget felt like the wrong tool entirely. A budget tells you how much you can spend on each category. It does not tell you why you built the categories in the first place. Picture the shape of your life back then, 3 years ago, as it really was. Not in terms of income, but in terms of what you believed you needed to own or wear or drive or live in before other people would take you seriously. Think about whether that number has grown as your income has grown. Think about whether the gap between what you earn and what you keep has stayed roughly the same even as the dollar amounts on both sides have climbed. If it has, that is not a spending problem. That is an identity problem wearing a spending problem's clothes. This is the open loop this chapter is building toward. How does identity actually set a spending floor? And what does it cost you over time in numbers concrete enough to make the loss undeniable? Stay with the mechanism first. Your identity has a financial requirement, not because you chose one consciously, because identity by nature must be maintained. A self-image is not a one-time purchase. It is a subscription. The car that said something last year says less this year, so the next car must say more. The neighborhood that announced a certain status 2 years ago has been recalibrated by who else has moved in, so the next move must recalibrate upward. The clothes that landed correctly in the room 6 months ago are now merely normal, so the next purchase must register again. This is not a moral failure. It is the architecture of identity maintenance. It is expensive, relentless, and almost entirely invisible to the person running it. The researchers who study this call it lifestyle lock. You might call it something simpler. You might call it the feeling that you cannot go backward without it meaning something about who you are. That feeling is the spending floor. It is the minimum monthly cost of remaining yourself, as you currently define yourself. Marcus's floor was roughly $4,000 a month before food, transportation, or anything that might be called living. $4,000 a month went to maintaining the signal, to the rent in the right building, to the brand attached to his wrist, to the dinners in the rooms where the right people ate. He was not extravagant by the standards of the people around him. That was the trap. The floor looked reasonable when measured against the ceiling of others. What it never got measured against was his own future. Now here is the number that matters. $4,000 a month is $48,000 a year. Invested consistently over 10 years at a modest historical return, that number does not produce $48,000 times 10. It produces something closer to $700,000. That is not a projection built on optimism. That is arithmetic built on patience. And the identity that consumed those $48,000 each year left no trace of that $700,000 in Marcus's life. It spent the future on the present, quietly, month after month, with excellent taste. This is where the revelation lives, and it is plain enough to sting. Every dollar spent to maintain a visible identity is a dollar pulled from the invisible compounding engine. Not borrowed from it, pulled from it permanently. The compounding engine does not send invoices. It does not knock. It simply runs for the people who feed it and goes quiet for the people who do not. The silence is indistinguishable from comfort until it is not. Raymond understood this. You met Raymond earlier too. The car that was paid off and unremarkable. The neighborhood that nobody photographed. The wardrobe that communicated nothing in particular. Raymond's income was not dramatically higher than Marcus's. What was dramatically different was Raymond's identity. Specifically, what Raymond believed his money was for. Raymond did not grow up wealthy, but somewhere in his early 20s he encountered an idea that rearranged something inside him. The idea was this. The purpose of money is not to announce what you have already achieved. The purpose of money is to produce what you have not yet achieved. That single reorientation changed the calculus on every purchase that followed, not by making Raymond cheap, by making him precise. When Raymond spent, it was because the thing genuinely served his life, not because it served his image. The absence of image pressure gave him room. Hundreds of dollars a month of room, then thousands. Then, compounding forward, something that looked from the outside like quiet luck and from the inside like freedom. To spend like Raymond, you must first decide to be Raymond. That sentence is the center of this entire chapter. It deserves a moment of stillness. The spending behavior is not the starting point. The identity is. You cannot simply cut the expenses that belong to identity maintenance without first making a decision about which identity you are maintaining. If you cut the expense while holding the identity, the expense returns in a different form. The pressure does not dissolve. It finds a new outlet. This is why traditional budget advice fails the people who need it most. It attacks the symptom while leaving the root untouched. The decision Marcus eventually made was not to become someone who spent less. It was to become someone for whom the visible proof was no longer the point. That shift did not happen through a budget spreadsheet. It happened through a specific question he started asking before every significant purchase. The question was not, "Can I afford this?" The question was, who am I being when I buy this? That question is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be, because the honest answer reveals whether you are buying a thing or buying an identity. And once you can see the difference, the identity purchases stop feeling like living. They start feeling like a subscription you never consciously agreed to pay. Here is the open loop now closed. Your spending floor is set by your identity, not your income. As your income rises without an identity recalibration, the floor rises with it, and the gap between earning and keeping stays exactly the same. The only intervention that changes the long-term outcome is a prior one. You do not fix the spending by examining the spending. You fix the spending by examining who you believe you must appear to be, and then questioning whether that appearance is worth what it costs compounded forward across the next decade. Later on, we will reach an idea about sacrifice and financial discipline that clashes with the familiar story. Once you see it, the contradiction resolves in a way that changes how you make decisions for good. For now, carry this forward. The next chapter will show you what the identity recalibration actually looks like in practice, not as an abstraction, as a sequence of specific internal decisions that either keep you spending at the floor you inherited or let you build something beneath it. A new floor. One that belongs to the future version of you rather than the performance of the current one. Who you are deciding to be is already costing you something. The only question left is whether that cost is buying you freedom or buying you applause that nobody remembers by morning. Chapter 9. Decide to be boring on purpose. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen left behind the same strange artifact. Not gold, not weapons, not grand buildings that crumbled into sand. What every culture left behind, if you look carefully enough, was evidence of two kinds of people. Those who performed well and those who built quietly. The performers drew crowds. They attracted admiration. They were the ones people told stories about. But the builders, the ones who woke before anyone noticed and worked in ways that produced no spectacle, they were the ones whose descendants inherited something real. This pattern is older than any system of money or any theory of wealth. It is written into the fabric of how accumulation actually works. And right now, in your life, in the specific financial situation you are sitting inside today, you are standing at the intersection of those two choices. What you hear in this chapter will not sound like a sacrifice. It will sound like the most deliberate decision a person can make. That last question from the previous chapter is still sitting in the air. Whether the cost of who you are being is buying you freedom or buying you applause nobody remembers by morning. Hold that thought. This chapter is going to answer it in a way you did not expect. Let us talk about Raymond again. You met Raymond earlier in this book. Raymond is 34. He drives a car that is 7 years old and has a small dent above the rear left wheel that he has never bothered to fix. He eats lunch at his desk most days, not because he cannot afford to go out, but because he stopped caring about the performance of the lunch hour years ago. He has 3 automatic transfers that leave his checking account every single month, and he does not watch them happen. He has not checked his investment account balance in 11 weeks. His Saturday mornings begin with coffee made at home, a walk that takes the same route through the same neighborhood, and about 40 minutes of reading something that has nothing to do with trends or markets or what is happening on anyone's feed. Raymond does not post about his money. He does not talk about his money. He does not wear his money. And Raymond has quietly built more net worth by 34 than anyone in his social circle believes is possible on his salary. Here is what nobody sees about Raymond. His life is not the result of limitation. It is the result of design. Raymond made a decision, a clear, deliberate, fully conscious decision. He decided to be boring on purpose, not because he ran out of interesting things to chase, not because ambition left him. He decided to be boring because one afternoon, a few years back, he did a specific kind of math. He added up how much the performance of wealth had cost him, the dinners to keep appearances, the clothes bought for impressions, the mental energy spent curating a version of himself that looked like he was already there. Then he looked at what that same money and energy, redirected quietly and consistently, would produce over a decade. The numbers were not close. They were not even in the same category. Raymond chose boring the way a serious chess player chooses a position, deliberately. With full knowledge of what it costs in the short term and what it produces in the long term. Revisit the shape of your life back then, 3 years ago, as it really was. Not financially, not yet, just think about who you were spending your energy trying to impress. Think about the decisions you made that week that were shaped more by how they would look than by whether they were moving you forward. Think about how much of your financial behavior in those years was performance. Then ask yourself honestly, what did the audience give you in return? That is the mirror moment. Sit in it for a second. Because the open loop this chapter introduced at the very beginning is this. If the builders always outlast the performers, why does everyone keep trying to perform? Here is the answer. Performance gets rewarded immediately. The dinner out gets noticed tonight. The new item gets commented on this week. The trip gets liked within minutes. And the quiet deposit into an account nobody can see gets nothing. No response. No signal. No dopamine. The financial culture you were raised inside is built to reward the visible and ignore the invisible. So you trained yourself to seek visible wins, even when invisible wins were the only ones that compounded. Choosing boring breaks that training deliberately. There is a woman named Priya who worked in marketing for a mid-size company in a city where everyone around her was spending visibly and talking loudly about opportunity. Priya had a ritual. Every time she felt the pull to spend on something that was more about signal than substance, she would write the number down on a piece of paper and set it aside for 72 hours. She called it her delay drawer. Most of the time, after 72 hours, the desire was gone. The impulse had burned itself out without costing her anything. Over 4 years, Priya calculated that her delay drawer had saved her close to $18,000, not because she was depriving herself, because she had built a deliberate gap between the stimulus and the response. That gap was her edge. It was unsexy. It was invisible. It was the most financially aggressive thing she ever did. That is what choosing boring actually looks like in practice. Not deprivation. Not joylessness, a gap, a pause. A system that catches the impulse before the impulse catches your money. Now here is the revelation, and it needs to land clearly. Choosing to be boring is not a personality resignation. It is not you deciding to give up on life or shrink yourself or stop wanting things. It is the most aggressive wealth move available in a culture addicted to stimulation. Everyone else is competing for attention. You are opting out of that competition entirely. Every resource you were spending on that race gets redirected into something that does not need an audience to grow. Quiet compounding does not care whether anyone is watching. The account balance does not pause because you stopped performing. And the word boring, the word that may have been used against you, the word that gets attached to people who do not perform, the word that is supposed to sting, that word is a compliment from someone who does not yet understand what you understand. When someone calls you boring for not joining the spending, for not showing up to the performance, for driving the car with the dent in it, they are accidentally telling you that your strategy is invisible to them. Good. Invisible is exactly where compound growth lives. Raymond does not explain himself. Priya does not justify her delayed drawer. The quietest compounders you will ever meet are not quiet because they are unsure. They are quiet because they chose it. They understand that the most powerful financial move in a world full of noise is simply to stop making noise and start making progress. Your identity right now, the one you are constructing with every decision you make, is either performing or compounding. Those two things are not always mutually exclusive. But in the years when resources are limited and attention is expensive, they pull in opposite directions. You cannot perform loudly and compound quietly at the same time. Not fully. Not with the same energy, the same money, the same focus. So the decision is not complicated. It is just uncomfortable in a specific way. It asks you to stop competing in a game where the scoreboard is visible and start competing in a game where the scoreboard takes years to display the results. That discomfort is not a sign you are doing it wrong. It is the unsexy edge, the proof that you are playing a different game from everyone around you. As this book keeps moving, we will reach an idea about ambition and financial identity that clashes with the familiar story. Once you grasp that turn, it starts changing how you carry yourself in rooms full of performers. But for now, close the loop. Why do builders outlast performers? Because builders are not waiting for the audience to confirm the score. They already know what they are building. They already made the decision. They already chose boring on purpose. The way a person chooses a slow road that actually arrives over a fast road that ends at a cliff. The most decisive financial move you will ever make has no sound. Chapter 10. Boring is the best thing they'll say. You already know how this ends, not the book, your story. You have been sitting with these ideas long enough that some part of you has already decided. The question is not whether you understand the principle. The question is whether you are willing to let people call you boring and say thank you for it. That is the real threshold, not the spreadsheet, not the account, not the number. The moment someone looks at how you live, how you spend, what you talk about at dinner and says, honestly, with a little pity in their voice, you are so boring. And instead of shrinking, instead of explaining yourself, instead of ordering something you don't need just to feel seen, you smile. Because you know something they don't. That smile is not arrogance. It is not distance. It is the quiet satisfaction of someone who finally understands what the word actually means. By the time you finish this chapter, you will not just understand it. You will wear it. One open question is steering this chapter until the section closes it. Back at the very beginning of this book, someone called your financial life boring. Maybe it was a real person in your real life. Maybe it was a voice you imagined, the voice of a room you wanted to impress. Either way, that word landed on you like a verdict. Boring. Like you had missed the point of being alive. Like wealth was supposed to look like something. Like the people with the loudest portfolios were the ones who had figured it out. That was the insult the first page of this book handed you. This page is where you finally hand it back transformed. The most decisive financial move you will ever make has no sound, and neither does the life that produces it. Not because you have become someone smaller, because you have become someone who no longer needs noise as evidence that something is happening. Compounding does not announce itself. Discipline does not arrive with a soundtrack. The engine running beneath your decisions, the one that will change the arithmetic of your future, works in silence. And the silence is the proof. Consider Raymond. Raymond worked as a network technician for a mid-size company in a city you have probably heard of, but would not call exciting. He drove a 9-year-old sedan with a cracked dashboard. He brought lunch 5 days a week in a blue cooler bag his wife had bought him for a birthday 3 years earlier. He did not talk about money at parties because he did not go to many parties. When he did, he asked questions and listened more than he spoke. His colleagues thought he was, and they said this with a particular tone, very steady, which was their polite word for boring. Raymond maxed his retirement account every year for 19 years. He kept 3 months of expenses in a savings account that paid almost nothing and did not care. He never bought a stock because someone at a barbecue told him about it. Every raise he received, he redirected 60% of it before he could feel it in his checking account. He never made headlines. He never had a story worth telling at happy hour. At 51, Raymond retired, not because he won, not because something dramatic happened, because 19 years of steady, invisible, boring behavior had compounded into a number large enough to make work optional. His colleagues were stunned. They had watched him every day and seen nothing remarkable, which was exactly the point. That is the thing about invisible engines. You only notice them when they stop. Raymond's never did. Now think about your own life. Not Raymond's, not anyone else's. Yours. Turn back to life 3 years ago and keep it plain. What you were spending on, what you were performing for, what approval you were financing with money you had not yet earned. Think about the gap between the image you were maintaining and the account you were building. Not to feel shame about it, but to feel the distance honestly. Distance is what lets you measure motion. If that gap has closed, even slightly, you have already done something most people never do. You have chosen the invisible over the visible and trusted that the math would reward you for it. That choice is not glamorous. It is not shareable, but it is real. And real is the only kind that compounds. Here is the revelation this whole book has been moving toward. When someone calls your financial life boring, they are telling you that your compounding engine is invisible. And invisible is exactly what you need it to be. A machine that everyone can see is a machine everyone can interfere with. A machine no one notices is a machine that runs. The visibility equals value myth tells you that money should look like something, a watch, a post, a story someone reacts to. But real wealth is structurally silent. It does not perform, it produces. And the moment you stop needing it to perform, it starts producing faster. Boring is not a consolation prize for people who gave up on ambition. Boring is the operating condition of every financial behavior that actually works. Automated savings, boring. Index funds, boring. Consistent contributions over long periods, boring. Not comparing your account to anyone else's, deeply, profoundly boring. These are not second-best strategies. They are the strategies. The data is not ambiguous. The people who build durable wealth are the ones who chose consistency over cleverness and held the line long enough for time to do its work. Exciting strategies fail at a higher rate, not sometimes, reliably. The exciting trade, the exciting launch, the exciting moment you go all in on the thing everyone is talking about, these fail more often than they succeed. And when they fail, they do not just lose money, they lose time. And time is the one thing compounding cannot get back for you. Boring protects your time. Boring is, in this precise sense, the most aggressive financial strategy available to you. Now here is how you close this book, not with a feeling. With a commitment. 3 things. 3 boring behaviors you name right now and carry out of this chapter and into your actual week. Not inspiring behaviors. Not transformative behaviors. Boring ones. The kind that would make someone at a dinner party change the subject. an automatic transfer you set and do not touch, an expense you remove and do not replace with something similar, a financial account you review on a schedule and close afterward without sharing it anywhere. Small, specific, quiet, write them down if you can. Say them aloud if no one is around. The act of naming them matters because unnamed commitments dissolve. Named ones have edges. Edges make them real. This is where Raymond's story and yours converge, not because your circumstances are identical, but because the principle underneath both stories is the same. 19 boring years built Raymond's freedom. Not a single exciting one of them would have gotten him there alone. It was the accumulation, the refusal to stop, the refusal to perform, the refusal to need approval from people who could not read a compound interest table that made the difference. You do not need 19 years before this starts working for you. You need this week, then next week, then the one after that, with the same small boring actions repeated until they stop feeling like discipline and start feeling like character. That transition from effort to identity is the real threshold. Once boring is not what you do but who you are, the work becomes almost effortless. Not because it is easy, because it is yours. The word that started this book as an insult ends it as an honor. Someone will call you boring, probably soon. Maybe someone who loves you. Maybe someone who does not know you well enough to understand what they are looking at. When it happens, hear it clearly. They are not describing a flaw, they are describing an engine, yours, running, invisible, intact. That is the best thing they will ever say about you.